السلام عليكم. Radiographic anatomy of the forearm. The forearm is a structure on the distal region of the upper limb between the elbow and the wrist. The forearm contains two long bones, the radius and the ulna, forming the radio-ulnar joint. The interosseous membrane connecting these bones. Facial compartments of the forearm. The forearm is enclosed in the sheath of the deep fascia, which is attached to the periosteum of the posterior subcutaneous border of the ulna. This facial sheath, together with the interosseous membrane and the fibrous intermuscular septa, divides up the forearm into a number of compartments, each having its own muscles, nerve, and blood supply. In cross sections, the forearm can be divided into two facial compartments, the anterior compartments and the posterior compartments. The anterior compartments contains the flexors and is mainly supplied by the median nerve. The ulnar nerve also runs the length of the forearm. The posterior compartments contain the extensors of the hand, which are supplied by the radial nerve. This is the radial bone. This is the ulnar bone. This is the interosseous membrane. This is the flexors and the pronators of the forearm in the anterior compartment. This is the extensors and the supinators of the forearm in the posterior compartment. The radius and ulna. The radius landmark is the head, neck, radial tuberosity, and the styloid process. The ulnar landmarks is the coronoid process, olecranon process, ulnar tuberosity, styloid process, and the interosseous membrane. The radius. The radius or radial bone is one of the two large bones of the forearm, the other being the ulna. It's extended from the lateral side of the elbow to the thumb side of the wrist and has a cylindrical head that is separated from the radial tuberosity and the remainder of the shaft by the neck. Its lower end is expanded and its most distal part is the radial styloid. This is the radial bone. Lister's tubercles or dorsal tubercle of the radius is a bony prominent located at the distal end of the radius. It is palpable on the dorsal of the wrist. This is the Lister's tubercle. It serves as a pulley for extensor pollicis longus tendon. The ulna. The upper part of the ulna, the olecranon, is a hook shape with the concavity of the hook, the fossa anteriorly. A fossa found laterally at the base of the olecranon is for articulation with the radial head. The shaft of the ulna is narrow. The styloid process at the distal end is narrower and more proximal than that the radius. The radius is connected by the interosseous membrane to the ulna. This is the ulnar bone. This is inferior view of a cross section through the ulnar and radius bone and the interosseous membrane. The inferior radio-ulnar joint. This joint is classified as pivot joint. The articular surface, these are the head of the ulna and the ulnar notch of the lower end of the radius and the upper surface of the articular disc. The triangular cartilage. This is the triangular with its apex attached to the styloid process of the ulna and the base of the ulnar notch of the radius. It separated the inferior radio-ulnar and radiocarpal joints. This is the distal radio-ulnar joint. This is the radius, lower part, and this is the ulnar lower part. The capsule. This is slightly thickened anteriorly and posteriorly. It is lax superiorly and extended upward as pouch of recess saxiformis in front of the lower part of the interosseous membrane. This is the recess saxiformis. The interosseous membrane of the forearm is a fibrous sheath that connected the radius and the ulna. It is the main part of the radio-ulnar syndesmosis, a fibrous joint between the two bones. The interosseous membrane divided the forearm into anterior and posterior compartments, serves as the site of attachment for muscles of the forearm, and transfers force from the radius to the humerus. As the forearm moves from the pronation to supination, the interosseous membranes fibers change from a relaxed state, then become tense in the natural position, and then once again become relaxed as a forearm enter the supination. The contents of the anterior facial compartments. The muscles in the anterior compartment of the forearm are split into 3 categories: superficial, intermediate, and deep. Superficial muscles of the frontal of the forearm: pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, flexor carpi ulnaris, and flexor digitorum superficialis. And the intermediate part of the anterior compartment of the muscle of the forearm, flexor digitorum superficialis. The deep muscles of the frontal of the forearm, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor pollicis longus, pronator quadratus. This is muscles of the anterior compartment. This is the superficial part. This is the pronator teres. This is flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor pollicis longus. This is the intermediate part, flexor digitorum superficialis, and the deep part is the flexor digitorum profundus, flexor pollicis longus, and the pronator quadratus. Muscles of the superficial layer of the posterior compartment of the forearm. We have the brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, and extensor carpi ulnaris. Muscles of the deep layer of the posterior compartment of the forearm. We have the supinator, abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus, extensor indicis, and the anconeus. This is the superficial part. Muscles of the posterior compartment. We have the brachioradialis, extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor carpi radialis brevis. Also, we have flexor carpi ulnaris and flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris, and extensor digiti minimi. And in the deep part of the posterior compartment, we have anconeus, supinator, abductor pollicis longus, abductor pollicis brevis, and extensor pollicis longus, and extensor indicis. Arterial supply. The arterial supply, the radial and the ulnar arteries are formed by bifurcation of the brachial artery within the cubital fossa. The radial artery supply the posterolateral aspect of the forearm. This contributes to an anastomosis network surrounding the elbow joint and carpal bone. The radial pulse can be palpated in the distal forearm immediately lateral to the prominent tendon of the flexor carpi radialis muscle. The ulnar artery supply the anteromedial aspect of the forearm. It contributes to an anastomosis network around the elbow joint. Also give rise to anterior and posterior interosseous arteries, which supply the deeper structure in the forearm. These two arteries anastomosis in the hand by forming two arcs, the superficial palmar arch and the deep arch. This is the brachial artery. This is the radial artery. This is the ulnar artery, which is common interosseous arteries divided into posterior and anterior interosseous arteries. Veins of the forearm. The cephalic vein ascending from the radial side of the dorsum of the hand and wind around the forearm toward the elbow. Here it gives the median cubital vein to join the basilic vein, and it then continuous on the lateral side of the basilic muscle. This is the median cephalic. This is the cephalic vein. This is the cephalic vein of the forearm and cephalic vein of the arm. Basilic vein has a similar course on the medial side of the forearm and elbow. This is the basilic vein of the forearm. The median vein of the forearm passes from the palm along the volar aspect of the forearm to join either the basilic or the cephalic veins at the elbow. This is the median vein of the forearm. The deep veins of the upper limb are usually paired vena comitantes, which accompany the arteries. The nerve supply. The nerves in the forearm derive from the branch of the brachial plexus and medial brachial cutaneous nerve. The 5 branches of the brachial plexus are musculocutaneous, axillary, median, ulnar, and radial nerves. All contribute to the innervation of the forearm except the axillary nerve. This is the median, radial, and ulnar nerves. The radiological features of the radius and ulna. On the plane radiograph, the head of the radius has a single cortical line on its upper surface, and it's perpendicular to the neck in the normal radiograph. Angulation of the head or double cortical line are sign of radial head fracture. This is the lateral and the frontal view of the forearm bones. This is the ulnar and radial bones. The triceps muscle is inserted into the tips of the olecranon. Fracture of the olecranon is associated with the proximal displacement by the action of this muscle. This is the olecranon fracture. Pronator quadratus fat pad sign. The pronator quadratus muscle arises on the distal ulna and pass to the distal radius. Thin fat pad overlying this muscle and visible as linear lucency on the lateral radiograph of the wrist. This is the thin fat pad line. Thickening of this muscle by hematoma in the fracture of the underlying bone, leading to the bowing of fat pad. This is the bowing of fat pad line. Ossification of the ulna and the radius on the ulnar bone, beginning with the head at 6 years and fused at 20 years, and on the olecranon bone at 8 years and fused at 18 years. On the radial bone, begin at the lower end, 2 years and fused at 20 years. And on the head of the radius by 4 years and fused at 18 years. Colles fracture. This is type of fracture of the distal forearm in which the broken end of the radius is bent backward, which is the forms one appearance fracture, ordinal for deformity. Smith fracture is extra-articular fracture of the distal radius with association palmar or volar angulation of the distal fracture fragment. It's also called Goyrand fracture or Vers-Colles fracture. This is a cross-section of the right mid-forearm looking at, this is radius bone, ulnar bone, this is the interosseous membrane, and the flexors, the anterior compartment, and extensors, and abductor posterior compartment. On MRI, we have 3 important sections, the upper, mid, and lower part of the forearm MRI. On the upper part, we have the ulna, the radius, anterior flexor muscles, and posterior compartments. This is also on the middle part. This is the interosseous membrane. This is also a lower part. This is ulna, radius, this is flexor digitorum profundus. This is the extensors muscles. This slide shows brachial MR angiography. This is show the brachial artery, the radial artery, also the ulnar artery with its anterior and posterior interosseous arteries. This is venography of the upper limb. Within venography of the upper limb is achieved by injection of the superficial veins of the dorsum of the hand. To visualize the deep veins, film are taken with or without inflation of the tourniquet on the arm above the elbow. By this investigation, we show acute thrombus venography, show acute thrombus in the cephalic vein. This is upper extremity venography showing filling defect within the cephalic vein consists with acute thrombus, but also show patent basilic vein. كويس. بدي أستاذ؟
اكو احد عنده سؤال الدكتوره هدى رعد قبل ما نروح على الكويز؟ فرح زهير.
نعم أستاذ، عندنا هنا رقم 1 الكابيتولم of humerus.
This is the capitulum of the humerus. دكتور سؤدد.
نعم أستاذ. Number 2, this is the head of the radius.
This is the head of the radius. Excellent. وراها فرح زهير.
نعم أستاذ، النيك أوف راديوس.
نيك اوكي. اومي نمبر 4.
نعم أستاذ. This is the olecranon process of the ulna.
منو يا مصلي insert in this in the olecranon قالته بالمحاضرة.
ترايسبس استاذ.
الترايسبس. اكسلنت. من يصير كونتراكشن يصير فراكتشر بالاوليك. اوكي استاذ محمد تكمل. استاذ محمد.
اي نعم.
استاذ بس اكو خطا، هي بس هذا الكوز عندي، اكو خطا صار عندي بالكوز الثاني، فبس هذا الكوز عندي.
اوكي
يلا ماكو مشكله.
ماكو مشكله. اذا
الكوز نفسه مال دكتور عزام تكرر عندي.
اوكي. اذا